going to share my, I guess I'll just share my screen first thing here. There it is, share away. And we're going to go to the slideshow from beginning. So does that look right to everybody?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, I just want to start off by thanking you all for coming and thanking you, the AGS, for having me speak today. It is a great honor to be speaking to such an important rock garden club of the world, and it's very exciting for me to share the stories of the plants that have been with me on my journey for almost my whole life. The mountain ranges that occur in your very backyard are the ones that you know the best, and I've certainly given talks like this locally, but I've never given it to people from afar. So I'm really excited to share. I should mention before we go any further that a little bit about myself, not too much, don't want to bore you, but one thing that I have to squeeze in somewhere, and so let's get it over with, is the fact that Kenton Seth and I have just written a book, and it came out this summer. It's already sold out of the first printing. And for anyone that cares enough about Trellis Gardens, I do believe it's still available from the AGS website, and it's published by Filbert Press in the UK. So there we go, quite a little plug for the book. But now on to the adventuring. So I started adventuring from quite a young age. I was in the Boy Scouts, and my scout leader and other scouts, we would go up into the hills at a young age. Here I am in 1981, just 11 years old, with my trusty backpack and my canteen, and no doubt my big, huge Rambo knife with the compass on the end of the handle, everything you need to survive out in the wilderness. And here we are many years later, and I found myself doing the exact same thing. In the early years, we weren't so much looking at the flowers. We were more so curious, aiming to get to the tops of the hills. But as time went on, I started to realize just how important the flowers were. And now the flowers are the main reason that we go up into the hills. Now, it's important to have friends in these places. Vancouver Island is very remote. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of my good friends on this journey. Shane is my mountain brother for the last 20 years. And I don't know what I would do up there without him. We help each other. We rescue each other. We save each other. Chad is a very important friend. He's a bog gardener, also very knowledgeable alpine plantsman. It's important to pick the people you're traveling with in these mountains. Like I said, we're often off trail. And so if something goes wrong, you need to have friends to help you. Dr. Hans Romer is one of my most important mentors. We spent many trips together into the alpine around here. And if you don't know him, he has been a major contributor to a fairly recent publication, Alpine Plants of British Columbia, Alberta, and Northwest North America, which is pretty much the new and most important book to cover all the Western North American mountains and their plants. So my pardon for the blurry map here, but the area of the world we're going to be covering is Western North America. In the red triangle is Vancouver Island and associated mountains. So zooming in a little bit here, I live in Victoria, British Columbia, which is the southern end of Vancouver Island. And the mountain ranges we're going to be exploring today are predominantly Vancouver Island. That is what I know the best. And that's where I have not missed a single year in the mountains since 1984. I've always managed to make it up there for at least 2 or 3 trips a year. We also do a lot of, I should mention that this is about a 4-hour drive for us from Victoria to those mountains. Similar distance, except you have to take a boat, is the Coast Ranges north of Vancouver, relatively accessible mountains. And then favorites of the Victoria Rock Garden Club, because they're actually the closest mountains to us, would be the Olympic Ranges, just south of us and to the west of Seattle. Then we have the North Cascades, which involve some of the biggest glaciers in America. And we'll be taking a quick peek at those areas. And then, of course, everyone's favorite, the dry side, the Wenatchee Mountains, where all kinds of extra special things come from. So as you can see, this is from Victoria. I have all of these mountains that are quite accessible to me, at least from a distance point of view. So starting with Vancouver Island, as you can see here, everything in white would be considered alpine. But the main thing to know about Vancouver Island is because of the Ring of Fire, and this is the case with all of these ranges for the most part, it's predominantly granite rocks. So granite rocks are kind of a neutral, very hard rock. They don't weather into soils that are amenable for alpines to grow in as well as, say, something like a limestone. However, we do have limestone lenses that occur above the tree line as well. We'll be getting into those as well. So here's Vancouver Island and its various different mountain ranges. Now, a quick trip down into the lower parts. You think that being an island, we may have a high degree of endemism. However, because of where we're located, just shot off into the west side of North America here, we actually don't. We have two plants on the island that are endemic to Vancouver Island, Adianum eluticum variety subpumilum, which is just the cutest little dwarf adiantum, maidenhair fern. And we also have a much sought after Trillium hibbersonii, whose locations in nature, and there's very few of them, are a closely guarded secret. But some of us in the know where they're to be found. And I can tell you right now, they are not easy to get to. That said, we have a lot of subspecies of things that occur on the island, like the Vancouver Island white-tailed ptarmigan. And we have our own special marmot here, the Marmora vancouverensis, which is a very rare and elusive marmot that is almost never seen on the island. Although we did discover a new population of them this summer, which was quite a revelation for the marmot recovery people. Anyway, so as I mentioned before, the highest point on the island is the Golden Hind. We actually do have true proper mountains here. We have glaciers, we have snowfields. Here's the Golden Hind, which I climbed in 2004. It involves climbing that snowfield that you see on the left of the summit. That took about half an hour just to down climb that piece there. So it is a technical mountain, but it was important to me as a Vancouver Islander to stand on its summit at some point. So here's a few shots of just the landscapes that you're going to be that we get to walk through. And like I mentioned before, on Vancouver Island, it's very inaccessible. There's only one paved road to the Alpine, and that's our ski hill here. Other than that, if you want to get up high, you pretty much have to go through that full day of lugging your backpack through the montane and the lower elevation forests. So here's just a few shots. There's our biggest glacier on the island. It's all of about 3 kilometers across, Mariner Mountain. I mentioned some of the limestone areas that occur at higher elevations. I will be looking at those in a few minutes. And here's just a few scenes of the island. This is a shot looking out to the west of a bunch of mountains that I can tell you are virtually never climbed. This area is so remote, some of the first ascents weren't even made until the mid-90s, if you can believe that. And here's part of just some other area. This was a bivouac site we had a few years ago where it was stormy when we went to bed, and then we woke up to this beautiful scene. So you can see, and then to bring in a bit of a British connection, Doug Scott, the first Englishman to climb Mount Everest in 1975, he came to Vancouver Island in 1985 and fell in love with it. He loved the untamed wildness of Vancouver Island's mountains. A lot of the world's mountains have been grazed and have been used for humans for centuries. Our mountains are quite different from that. No one hardly even goes in there, I can tell you. And the community of mountaineers and people that do get in there is so small that usually if you ever do bump into someone, which is rare, you usually know them anyway. That's a small community. So you have to be prepared. It's very important that you understand the techniques of self-rescue, wilderness first aid, and of course, navigation. And back in the day, navigation would be done by map and compass. But thank goodness, we now have GPS units. And so all of our navigation now is done by GPS, which makes things a lot easier because you know exactly where you are at any given moment, which really helps if you're in dense fog. So occasionally the fog rolls in. And of course, when you're in the mountains, when the fog rolls in, you are inside of a cloud. And so sometimes we get sort of lost, but we never get truly lost. So the vegetation zones on the island here, Alpine is 2,200 meters, and that starts at around 1,500 meters. Subalpine is about 1,200 to 1,500, depending on snowpack and side of the mountain. And then we have the montane forests and the lowland forests. Now, I mentioned you have to get through these lowland forests to get to the mountains. And this is one of the things I love about the island, is that when we're up there, we have them all to ourselves. So these trips usually start with either a canoe paddle along a lake, or usually a bushwhack up a densely vegetated valley. And I just love doing these bushwhacks because you just feel like you're so up close and personal with raw nature. Often the bushwhacks take more than a day before we get to the Alpine. Here's a shot from 2 summers ago where we were camping both in and out, because it was a 16-kilometer bushwhack one way. And so these are usually 5 to 7 day trips. Here we are just bushwhacking through the rawest, most wildest places on the island. And like I say, you feel so close to nature when you're doing this type of stuff. Now, one of the plants that we have to contend with is the great bane of the mountaineer on Western North America, Oplopanax horridum. How's that for a name? It's not uncommon for mountaineers to carry leather gloves just for the bushwhack section of their climbs, because these are the types of plants where if you have to go through a thicket of them, you're almost guaranteed to get the sharp point of these things stuck in your fingers, and you may not even know it until a couple of days later. So here's my friends bushwhacking their way through a patch of Oplopanax horridum, or Devil's Club, and it's amazing that they even have smiles on their faces in this picture, because usually this is not a time when you're smiling. Here's Chad negotiating a wall of Devil's Club. You can see it's quite an ornamental plant with its large palmate leaf. It is amenable to gardens as well, as long as you give it the water it needs. Anyway, we also get to experience the great forests of the West Coast going through these places, like the Douglas firs that almost nobody ever sees. And here's my friend Hans bushwhacking his way through with his GPS in hand across through some of these gorgeous forests of Western North America. Here you have mountain hemlock on the left, and yellow cedar, Chamaecyparis nootkatensis, on the right. As we make our way up into the Alpine. And then when we finally get there, we can finally relax. And here I am just hitting the Alpine and relaxing on a Chromoltz Abies lasiocarpa, or subalpine fir. And if we're lucky to get to camp before dark, one thing about granite is it doesn't drain very well, and there's all kinds of little tarns. And the last camp we had, which this picture from last summer, there was literally 10 or 12 tarns all within about 100 meters of our camp. So, and of course, because we're off trail, a lot of these trips end quite unceremoniously. Here's Chad finishing 7 days in the wilderness, just popping out into a highway and stick out the thumb and get back to the car. Usually there's some cold beer waiting in the nearest creek that we've left for a celebration when we get back. Okay, now time for the plants. Island alpine flora. I'm just going to divide this into a few categories. We're going to start with the highest stuff, alpine flowers. I'm going to move down to subalpine flowers. And then an important characteristic of our alpine areas is the heath. And then we'll talk about limestones and rarities and uncommon plants on the island. And after that, we'll jump across onto the mainland for just a quick tour of some of those other ranges I was mentioning. So alpine habitats, these of course are the highest ridges, the mountaintops, the places where you're going to get, very little woody plant material growing. And if you do, it's usually in a Chromoltz form. Here we are on here's our camp on Mount Hague Brown a couple summers ago. And so I'm going to start off with a banger. Here's a Western North American Boraginaceae plant called Phacelia sericea. You may have heard of this. It is very much growable in the right climates. However, here on the coast, and I'm sure for you in the UK, it would be an alpine house plant. What's so neat about this plant is the way it sends up its little filaments, and the filaments are actually 3 to 4 times as long as the corolla of the flower here, and they're topped with the little yellow anthers. So it gives it this little kind of bottle brush type of look. And whenever you come across it right on the highest points of the mountains, it's always a great pleasure to see. And like I say, it is growable from seed for sure. And our island form is a subspecies that grows more tightly than the forms you get on the mainland. Now, here's a genus from North America that most people know, Penstemon davidsonii, or penstemon. We have a couple on the island. Most penstemons, of course, are from drier places, Utah, Northern California, the deserty areas. But there's a few that reach the coast. And one of them is Penstemon davidsonii, Davidson's beard tongue. This is found on almost all mountaintops on the island in granite. One interesting phenomena that we find, though, because this plant, it doesn't grow great in cultivation, has a tendency to do well for a year or so and then peters out. But we found this one that was occurring about 2 meters above sea level. And what happens on the island here and in other places, of course, is I think seeds get washed down the rivers from the mountains, and you end up getting alpines growing almost at sea level in the river gravel along the edges of the creeks. So I've certainly seen phloxes and penstemons. Interestingly, this one that we called Kennedy Lake has done great in cultivation, and I think it has genes that have evolved at lower elevations. So here's Kennedy Lake, and it's gone on 10 years and it hasn't died yet. Now, we have a number of saxifrages on the island here. The closest thing that we have to what looks like a Porphyllum saxifraga is Saxifraga branchialis, the spotted saxifrage. Now, this is not in the Porphyllum group, it's in the Trachyphyllum group, which translates the rough leaf saxifrages, Arctic alpines, whose characteristics are more of a pointed leaf rather than a blunt leaf like you'll typically find on the Porphyllums. So this is always a joy to find, although I found it almost in every mountain range that I visited in Western North America. It was all the way down to Colorado and up to Alaska, at least. If it happens to freeze before the snows come, the rosettes turn this beautiful, beautiful red color. And this one is somewhat okay in cultivation. For a late bloomer in the rock garden, we have Solidago canadensis, which is essentially a roadside weed here in Canada. And it's probably a roadside weed there too. But we have a dwarf form, the northern goldenrod, Solidago multiradiata. This is what I love about this plant, is that it blooms in August in the rock garden. It blooms at a time when there's very little else blooming. And so if you time it right, you can put on a nice little show, nice little Asteraceae here at a time when not too much else is happening in the rock garden. Easily grown from divisions too. This is a no-brainer of a grower, that's for sure. Now, a lot of saxes have been shuffled around lately, like so many plants. I learned this as Saxifraga tolmii, but this one is known to be quite difficult, at least in my part of the world, to cultivate. It's got tiny little succulent leaves, but I can tell you that Martin Heimann in Tromsø Botanic Garden is now growing this up there, of course, above the Arctic Circle. You can grow all kinds of alpines. And he reports that he has them happily growing in the garden from seeds that I sent to him from Vancouver Island a few years ago. So we can all drool at what they can get away with up there in Tromsø, if you don't mind it being dark all day long through the winter. So anyway, moving on to the rose family, Luteca pectinata, or partridge foot. This is a gorgeous little thing, maybe a little big for a small rock garden, but it is growable. It makes a little... It makes a carpet of ferny foliage, and then it sends up these beautiful spikes of rose flowers. Just an absolutely gorgeous little thing. Runs by stolons underground to make its mat. And here's a plant that you probably know, because when I went to Scotland, I saw it everywhere. This is the bluebells of Scotland, although I have heard that it has maybe changed species recently, but this is the common harebell. In the alpine, it stays very, very dwarf, like maybe an inch to 2 inches. Unfortunately, when you bring it down to sea level, it tends to grow up too tall and then fall over and flop over. But it's a circumpolar species that is just an absolutely gorgeous little thing, especially when you see it growing on limestone up in the alpine. And I think last but not least for our alpine stuff, and I was trying to stay away to a point from things that grow where you're from too, but it's never a bad thing to see what grows all over the world. Silene caulis, moss campion. This thing grows, in mountain ranges all over the Northern Hemisphere, particularly in the North America, Alpine and Arctic areas. But of course, it does come into Europe as well. And it can be found in the UK, of course, on Mount Snowdon and in Scotland and in higher elevations and higher latitudes. But it's kind of a classic. And I have found one clone that'll grow just fine for me in a rock garden outside here. Typically, our clones don't do it very well outside, but I lucked out and found one that seems to be doing quite well. So here it is, Phacelia sericea, always a great joy to see, and certainly nothing special or surprising to anyone that's a seasoned rock gardener. However, once and only once, we did come across Silene Acaulis alba. I did take cuttings of this plant, although the plant was small, and I'm sad to say that I have failed. That was a few years ago, and this plant does not exist in my collection now. Better luck next time, I guess. So anyway, oh wait, here's one more from the waterleaf family, Romanzophia stitchensis. This is a North American genus as well. They range all the way from sea level to alpine, depending on the species. And this is just a beautiful little one that can easily be grown in a pot. And again, it's in the Hydrophalaceae, the waterleaf family. Just a gorgeous little thing that you always find at the base of snowfields and the base of glaciers. It tends to hang around places that are covered in snow for most of the year. Real cool places. So that takes care of the upper alpine areas. Now we're going to move down a few meters to the subalpine. And I kind of think of this as the perennial border of the mountain, the plants that you would choose that aren't the buns and the carpets and the cushions, but the things that get a little bit taller. Maybe not as much interest to the rock gardener. Maybe this is the kind of thing you might grow in the meadow beside the rock garden. But let's talk about a few things. In the aster family, Erigeron peregrinus. This is the classic Western North American subalpine meadow plant. You always see this mixed in with columbines and of course also with Arnica latifolia. There are many arnicas growing on the island and in our coastal ranges. It's often difficult to tell them apart, and it certainly doesn't help considering they're always switching them around and splitting them up. But the most common one we have here is Arnica latifolia, and this is the one that makes the great displays in the meadows. If you're lucky enough to come across a place where it's taken hold, like in this moraine here at the base of Mount Septimus in central Vancouver Island. Now, of course, erythroniums are no stranger to, or you are no stranger to erythroniums in the UK. We have 4 species growing wild on the island here, and 2 of them are alpine species. So Erythronium grandiflorum, this is the widest ranging of all erythronium species. It grows all the way down to Colorado, and I'm not even sure how far north it goes, but you see it everywhere you go in North America, Western North America. It makes great carpets in the right locations, although not so much on Vancouver Island. But it's an absolutely gorgeous one. And if you need more information, just talk to Ian Young. So Penstemon cerulatus is the other coastal penstemon. Interesting, I mentioned they're dryland plants. This is a plant that, in places, in the dry places, they have a harder time growing our coastal ones, whereas we have a harder time growing the dryland ones. So it's a genus that does range across quite a great distance. But Penstemon cerulatus, this is an excellent plant for the perennial border. Easy plant, easy from seed. It actually self-sows in the garden. It stands up about maybe 2 feet tall, and it's called the coast penstemon, Penstemon cerulatus. The leaves are serrated, and again, this is one that you will actually find it in the mountains, but you'll also find it down at sea level. It can obviously handle our winter wet, no problem. There are a number of lupins, although we don't have any of the real super dwarf alpine lupins on the island, at least not in our alpine. Lupinus nootkatensis is one I just wanted to mention because it's such a gorgeous plant when it comes in the meadows. But what's really most gorgeous about it is when it first emerges. Just take a look at these buds. They're absolutely gorgeous. Every part of the plant at this stage is absolutely covered in these woolly hairs, and it makes for quite an interesting look and even better photograph. So there's Lupinus nootkatensis, named after the Nootka people here, First Nations here on Vancouver, on Western North America. In the Ranunculaceae, we have a number. nothing that comes too close to your beautiful European ones, but Anemone occidentalis, which sometimes is referred to as hippie on a stick, because when they finish blooming, and these are basically our pulsatilla relatives, when they finish blooming, they're these beautiful seed heads, which add to their ornamental value. I've never tried to grow this. I'm not sure. Susan Nilsson might be the one to ask from Sweden about this specialty on these ones. But anyway, the hippie on a stick or Western pasque-flower is just a beauty. Another one in the Ranunculaceae is Trollius. We have a North American Trollius here. Not sure if this one creeps over to Europe or not, but it's just such a beautiful thing to come across in the wet meadows surrounding lakes and bogs and things. It stands quite short. It maybe only stands about maybe 6 inches tall. And it's just quite a beautiful little Trollius that you come across in the meadows up in the Alpine. We do have bog communities in the Alpine too. A lot of the things that grow at quite a lot lower elevations do make their way up into the bogs. Platanthera dilatata is one of the more common ones, the white bog orchid. Gorgeous scent and growable, of course, in bog conditions. Another Ranunculus Caltha leptocephala, the Western Mountain Marsh Marigold, is another one that you'll always see growing out of running water and the most moist and wet places. Again, best grown in bog conditions where it can almost grow a little bit too well, I've been told. More bog type things, Kalmia microphylla is a beautiful little ericaceous thing that creeps up and it can be various different heights. This one I found near the summit of Mount McBride, so close to 7,000 meters, and it was only about an inch tall. So it was just so cute to find this thing. Just a beautiful little erica. So now, I hate to say it, but Vancouver Island is relatively poor in species diversity compared to other mountain ranges in the world. And the great majority of our subalpine is the heath. What you see here is heather. All of that ground cover shrub is heather. It really reminds me of when I visited Scotland a few years ago and had the great pleasure of driving around in the north to see all the heather up there, and it was blooming while we were there. So this is our version of it. Again, it's on granite rocks. They tend to not drain well, so you get lots of tarns and beautiful lakes, and there's always a flat spot to put your tent. So here you can see the tent just nestled in amongst the heathers. And we have a few different heathers here. The most common one is the pink mountain heather, Phyllodeseum petriformis. And this comprises the bulk of our ground covering heathers. When it blooms, it can put on quite a display, especially when you're in the middle of a whole meadow of the thing. Quite a beautiful thing. And then the other one we have, well, one of the others, but these are the two biggies, are Cassiope mertensiana, the white mountain heather, another just gorgeous little Cassiope that you see up in the mountains. And these do not creep down to lower elevations as a rule. Other plants we find on the heathlands is, from what I've been told from rhodo experts, a virtually ungrowable Rhododendron albiflorum. This stands about 1 to 2 meters tall, and it's always exciting when you come across a rhodo out in nature. I believe now with name changes, we're up to about 3 or 4 rhodos native to the island here. So it is something we can go out and see. And of course, you can't mention the heath without the blueberries. We have something like 9 species of vaccinium that grow on the island. In the heaths and in the alpines. And of course, it's an important part of any mountaineering trip. You don't want to spend all your time just trying to get to the tops. You got to spend a little time swimming in the tarns and eating the blueberries too. Very important. And of course, the blueberries turn red in the fall. Now, Eastern North America really lucks out with its fall color. I'm sorry to say that Western North America, given the fact that we're predominantly coniferous trees, we kind of look the same all year long. The few deciduous trees that we do have, mostly turn brown, our Gary oaks, so they don't really do much. Our maples can sometimes turn a nice vibrant yellow, but often they turn brown too. So we don't have a lot of fall color. But if you go up to the hills, it can be like the ground is on fire up there, because the vacciniums can be a very dominant part of the ground cover as well. And you can get all the fall color you want by going up there in September and October before the snow flies. Now we're going to talk about a unique thing here that happens on the island. And these are these limestone lenses that occur above the tree line. Now, limestone, of course, is a sedimentary rock that was formed in shallow oceans from seashells and corals, and so it's very high in it's high pH, and it weathers to form soils that seem to be more amenable to plant populations, whether it's sea level or right up in the mountains. And because our alpine limestone is in Vancouver Island, we are one of the rainiest places in North America. So it weathers into the most interesting shapes. Now, you do have to be very careful up there. It's also very important that you have very tough boots, because this rock will slice a cheap pair of boots. You'll get one trip out of them if you try to walk around on these limestone lenses. As you can see here, they weather into basically knife and sword blades. You can really cut yourself up pretty well. But there's a lot of exploring to do up there, and that's where we find a lot of our more uncommon things, or things that are rare on the island. This almost looks like a crevice garden, doesn't it? But boy, that would be one of the biggest crevice gardens you've ever seen. Of course, there's sinkholes up there too, and they can be quite terrifying. I should tell you that not one single limestone lens is accessible by anything other than a 1 to 2 day backpack. So you can be pretty sure that very few people ever visit these areas. There's also very few flat places on the limestone. This is a camp we finally found. You can see I'm on about a 6 foot by 6 foot flat space there, 300-foot cliff falling off behind me, quite exhausted. Melting snow, as you can see on the left there, because in the limestone there is no water. Of course, with its grikes and fissures, the water just disappears. So it's always a good time surviving up here in the Alpine. And so let's take a look at a few of the areas. Marble Meadows and Limestone Cap is one of my favorite places. Here's a Google Earth image of it. It's about a 2 by 2 kilometer square cap that occurs at about 6,500 feet. And it's completely, it's basically the government topo maps from the 1950s showed this as a permanent snowfield. So, it's only been in recent years that it's been uncovered. So you get only the first colonizers in these areas. But near the edges of it, where the soils have been able to build a little more, you can get some of the most spectacular meadows on the island in these areas. And of course, one of the plants, and here's another one that creeps all over the world, is Saxifraga appositifolia. Our North American species tend to differ from the European species. I've grown a lot of different European ones, and they all seem to make more of a lax mat, whereas ours make a tight bun. I'm sure as rock gardeners, you'll understand the difference between a lax mat and a tight bun. But you can clearly see in this photograph that it's not a lax mat. It's quite a solid, almost a rock in itself. Always exciting to come across this, and especially if it's in bloom. They tend to grow on places where the snow doesn't linger for too long, like steep cliff edges, vertical faces, and the very tops of mountains. And what that means is it blooms very early in the Alpine, usually long before we can ever get to it. But this year was a special year, 3 years ago, where we had a heavy snowpack and we found a few specimens in bloom. Now, phloxes are also North American, and on the west side, we have a group of phloxes. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. Phlox diffusa is known to be one of the more difficult ones, for sure, but growing in nature and on the limestone, it makes some of the most gorgeous carpets that you can imagine. It comes in, I can't even tell you how many photos I have of this plant, because it's virtually impossible to walk past one without taking its picture. That's just how beautiful they are. And they also come in lots of different colors, color forms. So here's your classic white. Here's white with a kind of a purple blush. And here's my attempt at growing it. This is I found that they come very easily from cuttings. Cuttings are no problem, but keeping it going for any amount of time is the trick. So I grew it in a pot, and this is a 3-year-old plant. I'm very proud that I got it to this point, but then I went away on holidays and I came back and it was dead. So anyway, at least I got it this far. Dryas is another rose family plant that is super uncommon on Vancouver Island, even though it grows by the acre in the Rockies. Again, it's a rose family plant. You're no doubt quite well aware of Dryas octopetala. This one's a little different in that it does not open its flower. This is as open as the flower gets. And it is exciting to find it on the island because it's so rare, and it's quite a beautiful thing with its little crenate, kind of oak-like leaf there. You can see not too dissimilar from octopetala. The Clayoquot Plateau near Tofino, out on the far west, is another limestone area that we'll take a peek at. Again, this is some of the rainiest places in all of North America. Here we are looking out from Steamboat Mountain out onto the Pacific Ocean. Bivouac camp quite high up. And again, just finding our way around. In this picture, we had to negotiate how to get down to those lakes, which eventually we made it. And that's a nice little camping spot between the lakes there. And so, yeah, many trips where you don't see anybody because they're too hard to get there. Salix arctica is one of it's really, we don't have a lot of willows compared to the mainland, but the Arctic willow is one that we see there in the limestone quite commonly. There it is in flower. It's catkins. And finally, the Upper Wolf River limestones. This is an almost impossible to get to place. This was a seven-day trip. Here it is here. If you take a look at the this Google image on the left, all that white rock there, that is what we went up there to explore, hoping to find range extensions or new things. And here it is in real life. That's the Golden Hind at the back there. You can see the sedimentary nature of this limestone when you see that outcrop on the left there. It's very stratified. And of course, this limestone has been heaved up from sea level over many, many years. And we're lucky to find in the Alpine where you can explore it. And we have it in lowland areas, of course, but it's all covered in forest. It's not as interesting. You can find some caves, but it's, anyway, so on the limestones, here's another sax that I'm pretty sure would grow in the UK or certainly all over the Northern Hemisphere, Saxifraga cespitosa, the tufted saxifrage. This is a mossy saxifrage that occurs all the way from sea level to tree line, to alpine. And it's extremely easy to grow. This one is no problem at all. Very easy from cuttings. Grows quite quickly too. And another ranunculus only on limestone here, Anemone multifida, the cut-leafed anemone. And I remember when I first came across this plant, boy, did I fall in love with it. And I grow it in the rock garden and it's just a beautiful thing. But it takes 2 days minimum to go and see it on the island. Whereas in Calgary, I was riding my bike through a city park and there it was growing in the meadows right there in the outskirts of Calgary. So anyway, and then when it finishes blooming, you have these beautiful ornamental seed heads. Quite an easy plant in cultivation, actually. It grows in the rock garden just fine. So again, being an island, I mentioned we tend to be poorer. There's a theory called the theory of island biogeography, which basically states that the more of an island you are, the less species diversity you have. But I love the fact that we also have little things like glacial refugia on the island, places where the glaciers actually didn't wipe out most of our flora. And you find things that occur on the mainland in little pockets. And so one of them is Allium crenulatum, the Olympic onion. Now, this is a plant that if you go to the Olympics, it's absolutely everywhere. It's almost like a carpet. But this plant grows all of about 2 inches tall and very easy in cultivation. Another like almost endemic plant to the island, although it does occur on the Cascades a little bit, Erysimum arenicola. I've certainly collected seeds of this for the seed exchange over the years, but I've never actually tried to grow it myself. I should really try this sometime. It's a gorgeous little wallflower. It grows all of about 6 inches or so. And you'll see it only in like specific spots in the Alpine here. Now we have 3 Louisias native to Vancouver Island. And of course, when you get off the island, there's many more. I think there's around 20 different species, all in Western North America. But we have our own special subspecies here, variety rupicola. If you go to the mainland and see Louisia columbiana, it's a much more grass-like. The leaves tend to stick straight up and they're more grass-like, whereas variety rupicola tends to stay much more compact and congested, which in my opinion makes it a better plant. So here it is with the new leaves and the flowers. Not an easy plant to photograph in terms of capturing its flowers and whatnot. But all Louisias are pretty cool for rock gardeners. And it's always a great joy to come across these when I do. I didn't get seed for this year, unfortunately. Of course, with the book, it was I didn't get quite as much seed collecting time this year, but next year I'm going to go crazy. Also rare on the island, Douglasia. Now I believe it's called Androzatse. Levigata, the cliff dwarf primrose. Again, on the Olympics, it's everywhere, but when you have to only find it in very specific places on Vancouver Island. Quite easy from cuttings, I must say. But then after that, it's like any Androzatse. It needs to be tended to properly to grow. We have another almost endemic Erigeron saliceae, the Salish fleabane, which for many years I thought this was Erigeron compositus, because in Western North America, Erigeron compositus grows on almost every mountaintop. However, this one is the Saliceae. It's named after the Coast Salish people here in Western North America. And another beautiful little alpine, which I've grown from seed and from cuttings, seems to come quite nicely. I have quite nice plants growing in pots now. Salish fleabane. Another one that's pretty uncommon on the island, another Arctic alpine, grows all over the place. Kalmia procumbens, the alpine azalea. I learned this as Loisularia many years ago. It's best grown around here, at least in bog conditions. I found that our forms to be quite difficult from cuttings and to just grow in general. But my friend Chad, he grows it in bog conditions, bog and hummock conditions, and it's grown like gangbusters for him. He's getting a good ½ centimeter a year out of it. So it grows extremely flat and extremely slowly. I did see it growing in the Edinburgh Botanic Garden in their beds. But of course, you have a very different climate there. And also, it's no doubt a selection that's different from ours, because if you search the world, you're bound to find one that'll grow in a garden okay. So props to you, Edinburgh, for having it up there in your garden. And I think last but not least, a extreme rarity on the island. It's only known from one tiny crack in a limestone lens that's virtually inaccessible, discovered in 1994 by some cavers, Cypripedium montanum. I didn't even believe it myself, because the closest population to this is many, many miles away on the mainland, and it's still a mystery as to how it got there. But there's about 200 blooming plants just growing out of one crack high up in the mountains. Can you imagine how hard it was for us to find it? It was like a needle in a haystack. We searched for 2 days before we found it about 15 minutes from our camp. Anyway, oh wait, there's one more for the island here. I mentioned we have 4 erythroniums, 2 low elevation and 2 high elevation. The other high one is Erythronium montanum, or the glacier lily. This grows in one place on the island. Maybe it's a glacial refugia type thing. But where it grows, it carpets the place, but it doesn't grow anywhere else. However, when you leave Vancouver Island and go just down to the Olympics, you'll find it growing as absolute carpets. So that's the last picture from Vancouver Island. And of course, this talk was predominantly focused on the island, but I can't help but just hopping over to the mainland very briefly, because there's a few specialties that I must talk about, even though you must remember every individual range could have a whole talk just based on its flora here. So let's hop down to the Olympic Mountains first. Now, this is, I mentioned, the easiest mountains for us to get to. We can see them very clearly from Victoria. Here in the background, you have Mount Olympus, the highest of the range at roughly 8,000 feet. I think it has something like 11 summits. It's an absolutely glacier-cloaked massif. I do intend to climb it at some point when I get some more time. But again, it's not, I don't think it's difficult to climb. It's just getting to the damn thing that's difficult. Also, being in the States, there's permits and things that I have to get, which makes it a lot harder than just throwing my backpack on and just driving up to our mountains. But the Olympics are really a real hot spot because the tops of the Olympics were not glaciated like our mountains were. The glaciers apparently went around both sides of the Olympic Peninsula. They pushed down to Puget Sound, and they left a lot of area untouched, and so the plants weren't wiped out. I did mention that Erythronium montanum. Here it is in some of the meadows up there. As the Rock Garden Club, typically we would take a trip there every year to experience the flora. One day is all you need to pack in more than your brain can handle, as a rule. But the Olympics, because of its situation, have a good number of endemics. And I'm just going to kind of hit the top three here. Petrophyton hendersonii is a well-known rock garden plant. If you can get your hands on it, here it is growing on the summit of Mount Angeles, which is visible from Victoria at about 6,000 feet. It grows out of sideways facing cliffs, and it makes great large mats in nature. I've never seen it make mats in the garden, but in nature, it makes these beautiful mats. This is in the rose family. Another name for it is the rock spirea. So when it blooms, it's kind of like a little miniature spirea. The next kind of classic endemic from the Olympics is the Olympic violet, Viola flettii. I should mention that all three of the plants that I'm showing in this little segment were growing within about a meter of each other on the summit of Mount Angeles. So very rich in endemics right there. Viola flettii is a alpine species endemic to the Olympics with almost more like a succulent leaf, difficult to tell in the picture, that's very strongly veined. I'm only telling you this because the picture doesn't show it too well, but it's a gorgeous little thing. The Olympic violet. And then last but not least for the Olympics, Campanula piperi. This might be our North American equivalent of Campanula raineri, or it almost looks a little bit like Physoplexus, a little bit the way in its growth habit. But the Olympic bellflower, Campanula piperi, is always one of the big joys to see whenever we go over there looking for the rare endemic flora of the Olympic Mountains. And oh, here's one more, certainly not endemic to the Olympics, but this has quickly become my favorite genus along with Acantholemon. And one of the best ones for the rock garden is Eriogonum ovalifolium variety nivale. And here it is growing right beside the road. Looks like it's growing with a Phacelia sericea, which is the plant I started out this talk with. Of course, there are lots and lots of Eriogonums in Western North America, none on Vancouver Island, strangely. But as soon as you're off the island, especially in drier rain shadow areas, you start to get into the Eriogonums, and they are truly excellent rock garden plants. Being dryland plants, you may struggle to grow them in the UK, but I'm sure they're great alpine house plants. Hopping over to the North Cascades now, again, south of the border, and we're in America again. Here we have Mount Baker. This is a picture taken from our camp. So it was quite exciting to be camping right up against the north face of Mount Baker, which, as it happens, has the largest glacier in the continental United States, outside of Alaska, of course. This is the Coleman-Denning Glacier on Mount Baker. It's just an absolutely spectacular place to be. And here we were camped on a place called Chowder Ridge, which is another limestone ridge that we're standing on in this photograph. Oh, the glaciers, right. Well, sometimes we got to cross the glaciers. And here's a fairly flat one. And just want to compare a crevice and a crevasse are actually two very different things. And sometimes on our way to the crevices, we have to negotiate some crevasses. Anyway, once you get past those, there's all the fun, exciting things that grow up on Chowder Ridge, like Castanea. And here we have Castanea rupicola, which is really one of the most beautiful of all of them, I think. A nice short one. These are hemiparasites. Not as easy to grow in the rock garden for sure. But people do succeed using host plants, fescues, artemisias, things like that. And so people have definitely succeeded, particularly Linda Cochran in Washington State has had excellent success growing these. So certainly worth giving a try. And then more penstemons. Here we have a penstemon that does not grow on the island, but it becomes very common once you get onto the mainland. This is the little flower penstemon, Penstemon procerus. And just look at how beautiful that thing is. I've certainly seen it growing in European rock gardens. Definitely made it over there. I saw it growing in the Czech Republic in a few gardens. This is definitely worth having. Beautiful little penstemon. And its foliage forms a mat. It's really neat the way it grows. It's a little different than some other penstemons. And last but not least, we are coming to the end here now. A lot of rock gardeners know about the Wenatchee Mountains. Now, these are on the east side of the Cascade Mountains. And it's very important in North America to know that all of our mountain ranges, well, not all of them, but the vast majority of them run north-south. And as the air masses cross the continent coming from the west, they deposit their moisture as they move across successive ranges. So every range they cross has a rain shadow in its lee. Even in Victoria, we're in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, which is why we have a sub-Mediterranean climate. We get virtually no rain in the summertime. So as you move east, you get mountain range, valley, and each valley is successively drier. And the valleys on the sides of, on the east side of the Cascades are the Wenatchee Mountains. And so, of course, these are quite dry. And the drier you get, often you get richer floras. So there's one plant that grows here. Oh, wait, we're going to talk about a couple quickies before we end with the grand finale. Claytonia megarrhiza variety nivalis. This is one we went to a place called Iron Peak to see on the recommendations from some Vancouver rock gardeners. And as you can see, this is a different looking Claytonia. It's in the purslane family. It has succulent leaves and pink flowers. Typically when you see this plant growing in the mountains here, it'll have kind of a washed out white looking flower, still a great form, but this is an extra special one. And my buddy brought some home, and I believe it's still living today. It's a good one. It's a tap-rooted plant, but it's a good one for longevity in the rock garden. Penstemon rupicola is another Western penstemon that grows as a rock penstemon. There's a whole bunch in this rupicola group that all look kind of similar, you know, and rupicola is kind of like the main one that you see in gardens here. It's got a beautiful blue leaf, and that contrasts with it's just almost a hot pink flower. We saw this from the side of the highway as we were just screaming towards our destination, and it just jumped out at us. We couldn't not stop. And it's because not only is it a gorgeous thing to photograph and look at, but it's because we also are very aware of this plant because it grows in all of our gardens here. It's an extremely easy plant to grow. Cuttings come no problem, and it's an easy plant to get going in the rock garden. My mom has a piece of it in her garden that's probably about 2 feet by 2 feet across. It's just, for some reason, extremely happy there. Again, when you're in the drier parts, you get more into the Eriogonums, and so this is one of the Eriogonums that we grow in the gardens here, Eriogonum umbulatum, and it is the widest ranging of any Eriogonum. It grows all the way down to way further south than us, and because of that, it has many forms. The choice one that all the rock gardeners seek out is variety Porteri, which is from Utah, which makes the real bun shaped. But there's some excellent umbulatums out there. They're all very easy in the rock garden. And last but not least, Louisiopsis tweedii, which is also endemic to the Wenatchee Mountains and has been referred to as the queen of the rock garden. I believe it was a Brit that coined that. It may have even been Ferrer. I need to go back and figure that one out because I've been calling it the Queen of the Rock Garden my whole life. We went, this is to be found in a place called Nanaeum Meadows, Naneum. It's located about 1,700 meters in elevation. So these are true alpines in the sense that they are covered in snow. All Louisianas are alpines, and they are all covered in snow throughout most of the winter. But as we were able to go there, this is really only about a 2.5-hour drive east of Seattle into the Wenatchee Mountains. And we were very lucky to catch it at peak bloom. Here's a few shots of it growing just by the thousands off of the cliffs there in Nanaeum Meadows. Of course, I did say that you could give a whole talk just on this place because the things we saw there were just mind-blowing and mouth-watering. But here it is, Louisiopsis tweedii in nature, the queen of the rock garden. And with that, I will wrap up the talk, and hopefully I've maybe educated some people. I know you're a very well-versed bunch, and hopefully I'll encourage anyone to come to Western North America and roam around in our mountains. I'd be happy to give you any information that you need, and maybe you can even come and visit me in my rock garden one day. So thank you very much, everybody. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a wonderful talk. After a talk like this, I want to start playing the lottery, win it, and then travel everywhere to look at such plants. And yeah, keep your diary free. I'm sure I will try to book you for another talk. I mean, there seem to be plenty of mountain ranges in your
yeah.
Keep us busy for a few years.
It's amazing how the grass is always greener. I have not experienced the European mountains as much as I would like to. Mm-hmm. And I take places like the Olympics for granted. And then I go to Europe and I mention the Olympics, and I might as well be saying the Dolomites because all the Europeans drool over one day coming to the Olympics. So one day I'll make it to the Dolomites.
Right. We are happy to take any questions. Just unmute yourselves or use the chat facility. Of course, we've already had 2 votes of thanks on the chat, Cliff Booker and Ian Smith. Yeah, Jane Seeger as well. She thanks you very much. And a visit to Calgary is being planned. Anyone else?
Yes. I always have questions.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. You mentioned a friend named Chad that grows your wetland plants, and
yes.
I'm wondering if you have tried that at your own location, and then I want to ask you a question beyond that.
Yeah, I am just embarking on bog gardening. After seeing what Chad has pulled off with Darlingtonias and Sarracenias and Pinguiculas and all those things that seem to be ungrowable. He's found that so many things that we failed with in our rock gardens seem to grow great in bogs. I mean, a lot of it comes down to where the thing comes from. A perfect example is Fritillaria camshactensis, which I seem to kill every time I grow it, but grow it in a bog condition and it flourishes. So, so yeah, I haven't done a lot of bog gardening, but I'm about to build a bog in my backyard. So ask me in a year.
Okay.
Did you say you had another part to the question, Kathy?
Yeah, on Primula World site, Pam Evelet wrote an article where she mentions briefly that some of the very difficult to grow Primula that are native here and probably elsewhere, she advised making a crevices in a shallow end of the bog. And so I was very intrigued by that. And I wondered if there was an intersection with people on your island and where I could get info.
Yes, and really, you need to connect with Chad. Are you on Instagram?
No, Facebook.
Okay. On Instagram, he goes by A Mind Like Compost, and it's just amazing the stuff that he pulls off. And yes, a lot of things, like you said, the primulas, a lot of those primulas are moist meadow plants, right? And so to grow them in conditions where they just never dry up is the best thing for them. So yeah, absolutely. But track down Chad if you can.
Thank you.
He has these crevice planters that are bog planters. So he grows sphagnum between the rocks and then pinguiculas out of the sphagnum. It's just mind-blowing. So I think he won first prize at our show last year.
What's his Instagram handle?
His Instagram handle is A Mind Like Compost. All
Right,
one word.
okay.
Yeah.
That's
Always going to
right.
get a few new followers after today. If you want to follow me, I'm Paul Spriggs, Rock Gardener. All one word.
Does Chad have a last name?
Kreutzenstein. Kreutzenstein. He's got German heritage. So makes him such a good rock gardener.
Thank you again.
Yeah, for sure.
On the chat, Diana is asking, over the years, have you noticed changes to the plant due to climate change?
Well, it's funny you should ask that because the alpine is one of the great indicators of climate change, right? Because when you think about it, the glaciers that exist in the alpine they existed at sea level too, 10,000, 15,000 years ago. So, I mean, the climate's always been warming. Yes, okay, we're speeding it up, of course. But just this summer, we definitely saw an example of climate change. Now, I don't know if you heard about our heat dome that we had last year, where we reached temperatures that we've never reached before. Well, this year, when we were in the Rockies, we were finding Saxifraga positifolia growing everywhere, but in most places, 90% of them were dead. And these looked like plants that had been very much alive in years quite previous to that. And I feel like Saxa positifolia could be a major indicator of climate change in the mountains, because it would have been experiencing that heat dome as well. And anything that was still or wasn't covered in snow would have been subjected to that, because we had extremely high temperatures, even up in the alpine. So yes, other than the receding glaciers, which of course in my lifetime have receded like a number of kilometers, we are seeing effects of climate change in the alpine.
Serena is also asking if any of the mountains you've talked about are protected.
Yes. Yes. I didn't mention that a lot of our Western mountains are in parks. So in Vancouver Island, we have a large park that encompasses the whole middle of the island called Strathcona Park, and it is protected. In the Olympics, you have Olympic Mountain National Park. In fact, most of the places I talked about have at least some parks in the ranges, but there's so many places that are not in parks. And of course, mining interests, logging interests, industry takes precedence as a rule, sadly. And so, yeah, a lot of it isn't protected.
Right. Do we have any more questions, anyone?
I noticed someone said they would like to have the Queen of the Rock Garden in the chat.
Yep.
Let me tell you, happily, it's an easy plant. However, I do keep it under cover in the winter. So, being, like I said, from the Wenatchees, it is from the dry side. So, you know, it's probably used to drying up pretty well in the summer and then not being too wet in the wintertime. So when I say it's easy, that's coming from where I'm from. Right? I don't know if it's as easy in the UK. It's certainly easy enough to germinate if you can get your hands on the seeds.
Only undercover.
Yeah. Actually, this summer, we did something quite fun. I have one in a pot. Grow it in a deep pot because it is taprooted. And because it was in a pot, it's movable. And my friend my friend Cam Kidd, he's got a beautiful pure white one in his garden. And of course, the white one is the rare one. And so we brought my pot to his house and we rubbed them together. And we just produced a ton of seed, right? And so we now have a few hundred Louisiopsis tweedii seeds that are going to be something between his pure white one and my apricot one. So we'll see how that goes.
By the way, Paul, Yesterday I was in Ashwood Nursery, so saw mother plants which really were incredible size and varieties. Yeah, so definitely for people near Midlands,
Yes,
Ashwood is a definitely good source.
Louisiopsis, you say?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, they're excellent in pots. Were those in pots usually?
Yes, pretty large, yeah, but in a polytunnel, so they were under roof.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Give it some depth. You know, don't put it in a tall tom, like the tall toms. Put it in one of those, and you'll have good luck with it. I think I had about 50 flowers on mine this year. That was only 2 years from seed, so they grow very quickly once they get going. And I should also say, grow it in pumice and sand if you can. It does not require any organic nutrients whatsoever in the soil. I grow mine in a mix of 50% sand, 50% pumice, and that's it. So just a little hint there.
Kai Anderson grew it in the hanging basket.
That would be good too. I mean,
saving some place in an alpine house, yeah. So
yeah, or like a strawberry pot would be great. You know, they have that thick caudex that tends to rot if they're planted on flat places or in less than optimal drainage. So yeah, the first thing that people tell you about Louisias is plant them sideways so that they drain perfectly, right? But they can still be grown in pots and stuff, no problem. Just give them the drainage they need. That's all.
Well, if you don't mind, one more question. You show Phacelia sericea at first.
Yeah.
And from first picture, I would have rather impression it was like a crevice environment, but later on the second picture was rather from scree, and I would believe it's rather scree plant than crevice.
It grows in both. It grows in both. Yeah. Oh yeah. You see it growing on the tops of mountains where there is no scree, just growing out of cracks in rocks. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay.
As far as I know, it's on the windy cliffs or ranges. Yeah, it needs probably some cooling effect.
Absolutely,
of the wind.
yes. Okay, that's why I mentioned it's only on the most extreme places in the mountains. You're not going to find that in the subalpine meadows where it's the soils are richer. You know, it's really more a cliff edge and like rocky place type of a plant for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And wonderful lecture. I would even feel to go to hike. Yeah.
Please do. Come and join me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yuji.
Hey, Paul, if I don't have pumice, what do you suggest I use instead?
If you don't have pumice? Yeah, that's a good question because, you know, pumice is that, they call it an aggregate, a porous aggregate. So it has air and water in the aggregate, right? And so that's, you know, what I love about pumice is it has that characteristic instead of just grit, because it looks a bit like grit, right? In Colorado, they use
perlite. A coarse perlite.
What's that?
A coarse perlite, perhaps.
Yeah. I would say that would work. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of perlite. I do grow it in my nursery pots for sure, right? Can you not get perlite?
Cat litter. Do you know that stuff you buy for cat litter? Do you get that?
Unscented.
Unscented. You
right.
get it is to absorb moisture.
Right, it's like a clay.
Try that. That's a very useful device.
Yes, Ari. What Ian's talking about, what we get in Canada is called a turfus.
Turfus, yeah. I have that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, turfus is a baked clay product, probably similar to what Ian was just mentioning, and yeah, it holds water. That's the thing, right? So it's basically like a terracotta pot smashed into grit, right? And so that would be another one. The one thing about rock garden soils is there's always something that you don't have to be stuck on one ingredient, right? No matter where you go, you're going to find something out there that's going to work, right? Even if it's just pure grit, right? Mix some pure granite in there with it or something like that, right?
Crushed lava.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's, you know, that's could be it too, for sure. Okay. It's one thing I find a lot of times it's not what you're using, it's the characteristics of what you're using. And one of the biggest things in rock gardening is people tend to overthink their soil mixes to the point that they get all confused and they don't know what's going on. But there's just some very simple rules to follow. And my first rule is 2 to 3 ingredients is all you really need. maybe some lime, right? That'll give you that'll be fine for most rock art. So I tend to be a little bit more like I like to be kind of ritualistic and add all kinds of little things like I'm making a little recipe. It's just fun that way. But really, you know, sand, grit, turfus, pumice, you know, leaf mold, peat, you know, those types of things are kind of like the biggies, right? So.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it's good to experiment too, because things like respond differently in different climates too, right? So, yeah. Any more questions?
Thank you, Paul. And
thank you.
Looks like
just to say, Joe Cartman in New Zealand always says that it doesn't matter what you plant things in, it's only a substrate to hold the plant upright.
Totally. I always think of that when I think of hydroponics, right?
Yeah.
You can grow plants in just pure water, right?
Yeah.
As long as you
hold them in the direction you want them to be, you know, and always remember, green end up, brown end down, you know.
Exactly. You see how simple it is? Totally.
Loved your talk, Paul. Love seeing you. We miss you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Very nice.
You're looking very good for a granddad.
Well, thank you very much. I have two now, you know. Yeah. Thanks so much. Great to see you. Well, thanks everybody. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you everyone.
Very much, Paul.
Thank you. Just want to remind you, we're taking a break in December, but we'll start again in January, and I'll present about the Alpines from the Western Alps. And then in February, we have Alan Eitan from Australia talking about Alps from, well, his part of the world. So just make sure you book your talks in the future and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you, everyone. Once again, I'll end the meeting now and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye for now.
Thanks, Paul. Bye.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Lots of fun. Hi, Julia. I see you there.
It was great.
Fantastic. Thank you.